So I am delighted to be here, and I really do thank Chris and Anne and Peter for putting on this conference, to say the least. It's become quite the conference in a very short period of time. It's only its second annual, and already look at the kind of turnout we're getting. So we're delighted to be here. I'm also delighted to say that GE is very delighted to be joining you in terms of our corporate headquarters moving here in the fall timeframe. So with that, I don't think this panel actually requires introduction, but I'm going to give you very quick tidbits about them so you know who's who. I'm going to start with Betsy Nabel, and I suspect you guys know which one is Betsy, right? Just in case. She's president of Brigham and Women's Hospital and professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. And along her many accomplishments is that she's a true sports enthusiast. And she climbed Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania, where she wanted to actually see the glaciers. And she wanted to see the glaciers before they melted. All right, Paul Hudson. Paul is president of AstraZeneca US and executive vice president of AstraZeneca North America. And a fun fact about Paul is that last year he actually trained and ran his first marathon. Guess where? Wrong, New York. So there you go. So it was not Boston, it was New York Marathon. Peter Slavin. Peter is president of Mass General Hospital and is professor of healthcare policy at Harvard Medical School. So here's his tidbit. He loves to play golf. Impressively, he had 2 holes in 1. But then he wrote and he told me, but I've been on a dry spell for the last 30 years. All right, sitting right here is Troy Brennan, and he is executive vice president and chief medical officer of CVS Health. And here's an interesting tidbit. Troy and Peter were actually interns, so Troy and Peter, at Mass General Hospital. And that was just a little over 10 years ago? Yeah, something like that. Yeah, okay. And then last but not the least, of course, is Gary. Gary Reedy is CEO of the American Cancer Society. His favorite movie is Dead Poets Society, and he often encourages his staff and the volunteers to carpe diem. So with that, we're going to carpe diem, and Gary's actually going to take it away for just a couple of minutes to give us sort of a general overview of where are we with regards to the state of cancer care.
Thanks, Sue, and I want to start out by putting things in context and just to remind everyone in the audience that in the last 20 years, the age-adjusted mortality rates on cancer have dropped 26%, and the 5-year survival rates for all major cancers has improved. So we've made great progress. Going forward, how we deal with access, quality, and affordability is certainly going to have an impact upon the progress that we continue to make, but indeed it is very exciting times. From an access standpoint, it's great news that based upon healthcare reform that a lot more people now have health insurance. That's really important for cancer patients because patients that don't have insurance are usually diagnosed at a much later stage with a worse prognosis and certainly with higher cost. But the big issue now is we still have people who don't have insurance, and we have considerable disparities that exist in the United States. So, due to poverty, due to low educational status, lack of insurance, variability to high quality care. So, the big issue here is making sure that we do have ways for patients to get access to the best quality care possible. From a quality standpoint, we're moving from a very fragmented system to a value-based system, which is very exciting. I think a few of the watch-outs or a few of the issues is, how do we make that transition to where patients don't get lost, in the process? And from a quality standpoint, how do we get the right metrics in place? Right now, most of the metrics are geared around process. We need to have more metrics that are focused on outcomes, and certainly not just on initial outcomes, but on post-treatment follow-up and a long-term outcome. Certainly around cost, the expenditures for cancer care have increased on average about 2.9% per year from 1998 to 2012. In 2013, direct medical costs for cancer were at $74.8 billion. which is the 4th costliest medical condition in the United States. It's a very exciting time. We have some very promising therapies that are coming out now. But the real challenge here is how do we find that balance between affordability of cancer care and also continued innovation, so that we can have that innovation that hopefully one day will lead to a cure for most cancers and certainly turn majority of cancers into a chronic disease. And the last thing I'd like to say is there's a lot that we can do as a society to help manage that cost on a personal level, because you can reduce your risk of getting cancer by at least 50% just through personal choices that you make. You know, not using tobacco, eating properly, exercising, getting your screening, getting your checkups. So I think we have to look at the front end from a prevention standpoint, but then also throughout the entire cancer continuum on how we can have the affordability that we need.
Thank you, Gary. And you know, in many ways, it's a pretty golden time with regards to cancer research and advancements. And I actually think, you know, golden time and cancer don't typically go in the same sentence, but when you think about it and the sort of metrics that we've gotten, according to ASCO, in 1 year between October 2014 and October 2015, the FDA has approved 10 new cancer treatments, 1 new cancer vaccine, expanded 12 previously approved therapies, and 1 device. Now that's a pace which is pretty unmatched, and I think you guys would all agree. So there is a tremendous hope in the cancer system, particularly with the world of immunotherapies. And I'm going to turn to Paul and Betsy first. And there is this alphabet soup of all sorts of different types of cancer therapies: PD-1, PD-L1, CTLA, CAR-T, combos. Paul, help us out. Give us a sense of what's going on there, and give us a sense of what we should be expecting.
Well, thank you, and thank you. It's very nice to be here. Just to point out a couple of quick things. You mentioned in the preamble, it was my first and last marathon. It was pretty brutal. You know, the immuno-oncology space is rapidly becoming very crowded, and you know that, I think, already. And there's an awful lot of work using immuno-oncology products in single-agent strategies. You know, for us, we have something like 16 studies in play, 9,000 patients at AstraZeneca, 12 of those, importantly, 12 of them in combination. So what you have is, say, a PD-L1 and a CTLA-4, and you're looking to try and make major breakthroughs. For us, leading in bladder, head and neck, become the real sort of battleground and the leadership opportunities in late stage to bring medicines through now to bring value to patients. But I wouldn't, as you touch on the golden age of science, I wouldn't leave it entirely to immuno-oncology. There's DNA damage repair, single strand, double strand, the WEE1 that we have, and PARP inhibition. There's precision medicine and T790M mutations. And of course, there's antibody-drug conjugates. Everything is moving at a dramatic pace. Everything is reinforcing the need for very personalized treatment strategies. And everything is giving us an opportunity to make breakthroughs. And it is an overused expression, and Gary touched on it already today, but making this move to chronic disease, or to making it a least likely cause of death even, that's where we're trying to go, and that's the important breakthrough, and there's an awful lot to be excited about.
Which is very exciting. And Betsy, can you give us a view from a leading provider standpoint? How are patients taking this? What are you seeing overall?
Well, thank you, Sue. And again, welcome to all of you, and our gratitude to our colleagues at Partners for sponsoring this forum this year. This undoubtedly is a very, very exciting time for our patients, where they have many, many opportunities now that they didn't have 10 years ago. And being responsible for providing care, we want to ensure that our patients have access to clinical trials, participation in clinical trials, and once there are efficacious therapies determined, to have access to those treatments. So the issues before us is how to reduce the disparities and improve access for all of our patients. How do we get the right treatment to the right patient at the right time, knowing that there's now a combination of precision medicine plus immunotherapies, plus probably cancer vaccines to amplify that response to the immunotherapies. And then finally, how do we make this all affordable, which is the issue we're going to spend more time on today.
Yes.
I think there's an analogy to my own field, which is the cardiovascular arena. And Gary, you referred to the improvements in age-adjusted morbidity and mortality. This is exactly what we went through in the cardiovascular arena over the past 50-some years, where we saw advances in both primary prevention, understanding the risk factors for heart disease, making vast improvements in primary prevention, and then making introductions of devices and drugs together that have led to a remarkable 20, 30-year improvement in age-adjusted morbidity and mortality. And I think that cancer has the same opportunity. The one message I'll ask us to remember, when cardiovascular scientists introduced these drugs, and particularly the devices, bypass surgery, valve replacement, defibrillators, pacemakers, stents, radiofrequency ablation, we fortunately had the luxury at that time of not having the economic pressures we do now. And yes, we faced economic pressures, but they were not the intensity. And you think back, if we had the intensity then, and we adjudicated the introduction of these life-saving devices, where would we be today? I only raise that as a caveat as we think about the introduction of these potential life-saving therapies for our cancer patients.
Excellent points, thank you. And I'm going to read off a couple of things here. This is getting to the heart of what we're here to talk about, which is the economics of these new therapies. So Yervoy, Keytruda, and Opdivo can run between $130,000 and $170,000 per year. CAR T treatment can be somewhere around $450,000 per year. What do you guys think? Be thinking about that, because we're going to be talking about this and really trying to get some real perspectives on this. Troy and Peter, looking at you, because you guys interned together, you're going to tag team this. And so when Sovaldi came out, it was at a price of around $80,000 per year. And this was for a 12-week regimen. And Troy, you had a lot to say about that. You were quite vocal. Share your perspectives associated to cancer therapies and the cost of cancer therapies.
In light of Sovaldi, I mean, it's not obviously not a cancer issue, but it's nicely illustrative. You know, in the world in which we face, you have a situation in which you have a single brand, that's a monopoly, and it's very difficult to negotiate any kind of rebates or discounts associated with that. And so Sovaldi was very expensive and unplanned expensive, because we thought that the big drug was going to be Harvoni, which came out about 11 months later.
But it was saving lives.
It saved,
right?
So get to
So
that part. So
yeah.
if you go to 11 months later, Harvoni and Vicera come out, then you've got competitors, and then you can get rebates of up to 50%. So you can make the drugs much more affordable. Looking at those drugs, though, we did a long comparative effectiveness analysis. It was in the Annals of Internal Medicine in March of 2015. And what that demonstrated was that those drugs were very effective from a standard comparative effectiveness about $13,000 per quality adjusted life year, which is really extraordinary for a branded drug.
Absolutely.
But nobody was interested in paying more for it, even though it was very effective. Problem is that a lot of drugs that we're seeing today don't get that kind of effectiveness in terms of trying to say, this is how much it's going to cost per quality adjusted life year. And there's a lot of cancer drugs that fall into that category. Difference might be something like Gleevec, great drug, clear, great outcomes, now going generic. It'll become even more valuable of a drug. But in the short term, and with very sort of narrow therapies that are coming out, we can't find that same kind of efficient effectiveness.
It is a tough situation, and I'm going to switch to Peter here and ask you a little bit about, you know, we're moving into this world, or we're in the midst of this world of value-based care. And I'm curious, in terms of a provider like Mass General Hospital, how has it actually affected the way you care for cancer patients? Has it, in fact? And if so, tell us a little bit about the bundled payments and how you're thinking about this evolving over time.
Well, thank you, Sue, and thanks to Chris and Ann and colleagues at Cross Partners for putting this together. We're certainly proud to be part of this conference and welcome the wonderful discussions that will unfold over the next couple of days. I mean, clearly, as Betsy said, I mean, we're facing much more economic pressure on the clinical side here in the United States, and particularly here in Massachusetts. A lot of our payment at Mass General across our health system is no longer fee-for-service payment. That we've leapfrogged over bundle payments all the way to global payments, so that when it comes to absorbing the cost of these drugs, we are, at the end of the year, potentially looking at having to write a check back to the insurance company, be it Medicare or the commercial insurers in this area, because that drug has pushed our budget into a repayment profile. We are, and I hope our whole healthcare system, not only partners but our country, still has the room to deliver therapies to patients that make a difference. It'll be a sad day here and across this country when we have to deny efficacious therapies to our patients because of the economic consequences. And I think as providers, it makes it even more important that we try to squeeze the waste out of the existing system and eliminate care that doesn't add value to our patients, so that we can free up more resources for care that does. At the same time, the pharmaceutical industry has to be reasonable on the pricing front and not gouge us and the American public when there are pricing opportunities. Gouge.
Gouge. Just checking, you heard that.
Well, I mean,
Well, hold on, have you finished, Peter, before I turn it back over to Paul?
I'll let him respond.
I feel like Paul has to respond.
you know, it's a complicated subject, and I think, you know, we were talking even before we came out here in the speaker ready room, and there was some confusion about actually how much things cost. There's also another layer that Troy just mentioned, that the rebates that get paid back into the health system, to the PBMs, et cetera, they can be significant. I think you mentioned up to 50%. We talk a lot about price, but we talk not enough about value. That's clear, and I love the conversations earlier. I think Gary was mentioning, how do you get to an outcomes-based philosophy?
Right.
Where are you willing to stand and fall by the value of the medicine that you bring to the patient population? And we should really be there, right?
Yes, yes.
And then the affordability piece, and it was mentioned again, I think Betsy mentioned it. You know, there's not enough emphasis put on what it's like for a patient to choose between groceries and a copay, or groceries and a high deductible. And, you know, whilst we may pass on big rebates, they don't always make it to the patients. And we have a real debate to try and make sure that we minimize the out-of-pocket expense for patients, because after all, taking a medicine or being prescribed a medicine, having say, ovarian cancer, and then having to choose between that and feeding a family is not a situation we want to be in. So we work tirelessly, quite frankly, tirelessly on affordability programs for patients, and we work tirelessly on demonstrating our value. Now, it's not easy in the US healthcare system, and as you know, I'm not a US national, and I've spent a lot of time working in different health systems, and I have lively discussions with CMS, for example, for those that can't really afford the medicines. What can we do to help? And when do we reimburse for medicines that have under-delivered on their value? And what does that look like, and where do we underwrite it? And you'd be interested to know that if, for example, a medicine doesn't deliver on its promise, and we talked through CMS and CMMI on this, I would say if it doesn't deliver on its promise, then we will fully reimburse you for the cost incurred of the medicine. And you get into a very interesting debate at this point, because the US regulatory and legal framework isn't really set up to deal with that. So if you reimburse for a drug that is under-delivered, now it's zero. And if it's zero, the zero is the best price applied to all patients that benefit from the drug. So you find yourself having these sort of contradictory conversations about price, about value. Often affordability is missed out. We have tons of work to do on making sure patients can get medicine. So whilst I get the sort of macro debate around what pricing is and the words chosen to describe it, I think you have to go an awful lot deeper. What I would like to see is us all partnering on demonstrating the value by innovative contracting and standing or falling by that. I think that is the only way, with that and precision medicine, to bring forward the maximum impact of the healthcare dollar in the US.
And we're going to come back to that, because we would like to explore that a lot. But this is to the entire panel, and whoever wants to answer it, is when you really talk about effectiveness and outcomes and truly trying to determine what is effectiveness. tumor shrinkage, increasing quality of life. And how do you really measure it? If, in fact, effectiveness is going to be used in the value framework, rebates and or going to zero, for example, who makes that decision regarding frameworks here in the US? Who chooses it? Open it up to anyone.
Well, I might offer a few thoughts. Effectiveness is like value. The value is in the eyes of the beholder. And as we think about pricing and how best to deliver value for our patients, one concept is really to ask the private sector to solve this. And why the private sector? Because you can make an argument that the market can come to a decision far better than the government and government regulation. So I'm going to put forward an idea to really spur the private sector to sit down and work this out together. And who is the private sector? It's the commercial payers, it's the academic medical centers and large health systems, it's the pharmaceutical industry, it's the biotech, it's venture, it's pharmacy. To really sit down and try to have a roundtable and construe this. Now, sure, that might be a difficult task, but I think we either sort this out together or eventually CMS is going to sort this out for us. And we know the kind of record that CMS has. So I'd really like to see the private sector take this up as an issue.
And I think you're right. And I think Gary had mentioned earlier, the patients, particularly those that are disenfranchised or are not able to access it, where does their voice come into this equation? And so when you say market, thinking about that consideration, I think we've not figured out exactly how to do that just yet. So Peter, I saw you were going to say something associated to this?
Well, I mean, I do think ultimately it's making a difference in people's lives that is the most important measure of effectiveness. Having said that, it's very frequent we can't wait until we have proof of that before we introduce things into the marketplace and have to rely on more intermediate outcome measures as proxies. But I think that is ultimately the gold standard. It's a difficult one to achieve, particularly in conditions that affect small numbers of patients that are very heterogeneous. I do think that, again, just to stir the conversation up a bit, that I'm glad that you're talking with CMS about all the regulatory issues, but I personally wish you were talking with them about pricing as well. CMS sets prices for hospitals, sets prices for physicians in this country. I personally don't see why they shouldn't negotiate for pharmaceutical prices as well. It's the largest payer in this country, and I think that would do a lot to sort of moderate drug prices in this country and make them not the same, but less, deviate less from international standards.
Very much so.
Well, I just say two things. One is that there is a 30-year history of sort of doing effectiveness analysis, and the common language there is, cost per quality adjusted life year, and you can use that in most drug situations.
So you think it already exists?
Well, they use it in Britain, for Christ's sakes.
They do. They do.
They do.
Very explicitly sort of says this is the and if you set a certain threshold of say $50,000 or $75,000, you'd have a lot of these second and third tier cancer therapies that are coming out now that wouldn't make the cut. Now that's a bad thing if you're a patient who has that or a doctor who wants to treat a patient with it. And it would take an act of Congress, because an act of Congress is basically described that we can't use cost per quality adjusted life here. But the good thing about value in this particular area is right next to pricing. If you bring the price down, then the cost per quality adjusted life year comes down. So when people talk about value, it's very closely related to what the price is. And I think that gets lost a little bit. I would say with regard to Peter's comments about about CMS, I don't think CMS will get involved in this. It's hard to see how Congress, this present Congress we have, would be interested in regulating drug prices. There is...
It took you 25 minutes to get into politics.
Well, just a glancing blow.
I know.
But Peter and Betsy face sort of political pressure to keep their rates down because people don't want the costs of hospital stays to go up that much, but that's local pressure. It's hard to find that same kind of local pressure with regard to pharmaceutical products generally, and especially for cancer products, which are, sort of ever so much kind of layered deep in the payment system in this country, deep into Part B, with a lot of buy and bill phenomena associated with that. So it's really hard to figure out how you bring political pressure to bear to try to reduce the amount of inflation that you're seeing for drugs, the way that you can do it locally, at least for hospital costs and physician costs.
So maybe I could just add a couple of points to that. You should be careful what you wish for with QALYs and the UK healthcare system. I think access to new and innovative treatments is more difficult and more challenging, and of course it's a socialized healthcare system, so you don't really pay for your healthcare. I think here, because of the premiums and because of what families who can't always afford it invest in their healthcare, there's a demand to have access to more innovative medicine. So I think you have to have a way of assessing against the current and US standard, not just cherry picking the bits that you favor from different healthcare systems. I think where Part B is concerned, and we talked about CMS's record, the recent proposed demonstration is, without consultation, I may add,
Yep.
Is going to lead to some quite fundamental changes. And I was talking to my local team this morning, and just for us, just for one medicine, there'll be 180 metastatic breast cancer patients who are on one of our medicines who probably won't get treatment in this area alone, based on the fact that the Part B changes mean that the reimbursement will be less than the cost of the medicine. This is not about the cost of the medicine. This is actually about the system set up to reimburse less. I think the other point, and I don't want to lose this point, because it was a throwaway line from Dr. Dimitri, I think, in the previous panel, we just caught the end of it, when he was asked, can't you go and develop some medicines for one of the big hospitals, I think it was, or academic systems, and he said, do you realize how easy it is to throw away our endowment on a couple of interesting assets, right? The entire endowment. That's what he said.
That's what he said.
And I think you have to remember the risk associated with developing medicines. And I think you then go into the cancer moonshot and Joe Biden's work. The demand for breakthrough therapies has never been greater. The demand for medicines for smaller and smaller patient populations has never been greater. And yet the environment to deliver and price and value innovative medicines has never been more constraining. So we're at a watershed, a difficult cross in the roads for what happens next. And that's why I loved your comment about us all getting together and trying to decide what's next, because we can't deprive patients of medicines that they need. We really can't.
And I just want to just jump in here real quickly, because everything we do, we look at through the lens of the cancer patient. So in answer to your question, I mean, for patients, I mean, obviously survival is the key, but also quality of life, side effects, and what's important to them. So I totally agree with Betsy that this needs to be a multi-stakeholder approach, to get together, but certainly make sure that as we do that we are including the voice of the patient in the process.
No doubt the patient experience has to sit front and center. We also have to think about innovation. And I think we love to take great pride here in Boston and in the United States that we love to innovate, and we're pretty good at it. What's the cost associated with that? There's a hidden cost that if we don't innovate, we'll pay the price on many fronts for it. By analogy back to the cardiovascular world, I think about when stents were first introduced back in the mid-1980s. They were metal, they were highly thrombotic, they formed blood clots, and many thought that they should just go away. If we applied a very strict criteria around effectiveness, we would have stopped innovating around stents. And look at them today. They're biodegradable, they have drug elution, and they're the primary modality for an interventional approach to coronary artery disease. So we have to keep in mind innovation and not lose sight of that importance when we think about effectiveness.
I think it's right, and it's innovation not only in technology, but clearly it's innovation also in business models. And Paul, you started to allude to this, and Betsy was alluding to it in terms of bringing together a different type of conversation. Talk a little bit about how you see pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies, PBMs coming to the table and contracting differently, potentially. Give a little bit of a sense for that, which has happened in the cardiovascular world.
Yeah, sure. In fact, cardiovascular is probably the leading area where it has happened. I mean, we've, I think, currently somewhere close to 20 innovative contracts across the United States with very large providers of healthcare. And we've stepped in quite clearly and said, these are the results of our pivotal studies, or these are the results on which we were approved. And we would like to demonstrate them in a real-world setting. And we'll underwrite the risk of doing that. We're very happy to do that, because we should stand or fall by the value of our medicines. And we need to be able to bring that value through. And if we don't, then we need to hold hands on the patient's care, incidentally, because it's one thing, and it's more difficult in cardiovascular. It's one thing agreeing to risk share on an innovative contract to demonstrate value, to find out that the healthcare system itself has not supported the education or the adherence of the patient at all. And that's something we have to come up with. A little bit different in oncology, but very hard in cardiovascular. We've worked tirelessly to say we're open for a conversation, and I think several companies are doing that now. We are. Now, what happens next is a general level of suspicion about why you would do that. What happens next is lawyers crawling over contracts and trying to decide whether you should be able to demonstrate your value or not. Now, put that into context. We're having a conversation here where we're saying we want to, and yet it's not easy to do in the environment. So we can lose hundreds, if not thousands of hours setting those things up. We're going to continue because we think it's important. We're going to continue because we think ultimately you need to have innovative-based contracts. You need to have genetic sequencing and personalized healthcare. You need to make sure that you're delivering the very best use of the healthcare dollar in the United States. And let me give you an example. When you talk about technology, let's not miss out testing. BRCA mutation testing is a great example. BRCA mutation testing is, I think, 60, maybe 65% in the United States. Now, there's only one medical alternative, and every woman with ovarian cancer should be entitled to a test. And if you are positive, you should get a treatment for it. Perhaps you shouldn't if you're negative. Now we're talking about avoiding waste, which is what I think Peter was talking about earlier. I think we need to be much more laser-guided about the innovative contracting, the testing, the demonstrating of value. And after all, it is predicted that the 10 cents on the dollar will be spent on pharmaceuticals over the next 10 years in terms of total healthcare spend. That's not gone up, it's not gone down, but the innovation is at a golden age. I think we can get there. I think we can get there.
So, and all those points are so very well said. It's in a holistic system. But Troy, I saw a little smile on your face come when he was talking. So I'd love for you to comment a little bit around the new contracting sort of models.
Well, I was an academic for long enough, so I enjoyed the debate. And I would say on the value-based approach, this usually boils down to two things. One's more cardiovascular, one's more cancer. In the cardiovascular area, people will say, I've got a good drug. It reduces the amount of congestive heart failure that patients suffer. They'll go into the hospital less, so pay me more if I manage to keep the patient out of the hospital, which is very reasonable. The problem there is I've also been an epidemiologist, and getting the control group that you're going to follow to understand whether or not you really did accomplish the reduction in hospitalizations is very difficult, and I never see anybody getting to sort of that level to understand that. On the cancer side, it tends to be like pay more if it's a good drug. Like you give this drug and the person gets an extra 10 months of life, pay more for that one, pay less for the one where the same drug, different cancer, where you only get 3 months of extended life. So you'd be paying for value in that regard. The problem is in almost every economic model that you put together to study this, if you've got a market basket of goods, you're expecting as a pharmaceutical manufacturer to get paid the same amount as you were sort of pre the value analysis. So you're going to pay me more, you're going to pay me less, I'm going to end up the same. Whereas most people who are thinking about sort of value-based, like I have to think about value-based, is try to drive the price as low as possible.
On everything.
It's hard for me to see how value-based in terms of those two approaches ever becomes a big part of what we're doing overall in terms of reimbursing for expensive medications.
But I wonder if there's an option, Troy, for the pharmaceutical industry, the device industry, to partner with the payer and the provider. And so there's shared risk all around. As Peter has said, here in Massachusetts, we've moved very quickly to risk-based payment system. And right now, we feel a lot of that heavy weight as the provider, and the payer also shares some risk. But I think if that risk is shared broadly across different sectors, I think then we're all incentivized to work together, again, achieving the best outcome for the patient.
Peter?
And just to give you a feel for how it works here in Massachusetts, not only are we under economic pressure, but the state has decided it doesn't want the healthcare budget in this state to grow by more than the growth in the economy, which for the last couple of years has been about 3.6%. Last year, healthcare expenditures were significantly higher than 3.6%, but when you peeled the onion on that, the things that drove them above that threshold were, one, growth in pharmaceutical expenses, a combination of the innovative drugs that we're talking about, plus increases in certain generic drugs. And the other factor was expansion of the Medicaid population, which occurred under the Affordable Care Act.
Right.
Everything else was almost flat in terms of expense growth. So hospitals, physicians were doing a good job keeping routine care affordable and basically not having its costs go up at all. It was these other two factors that were sort of blowing the budget on healthcare expenditures in this state and again, there's an enormous pressure on us and other healthcare providers that have formed ACOs to keep those costs under control.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, let me just go to this next one, which is around the FDA. When we talk about shared risk and we talk about accelerating solutions to the marketplace, particularly the types of solutions that could be either biosimilars or things that allow for a much more competitive marketplace, should the FDA get more competitive with regards to really allowing more innovation to come to the marketplace? I mean, arguably, they've been doing that recently with the kind of push that has come through the system. Any suggestions, particularly you, Paul, when you think about the FDA and what you would ask them to consider?
Well, I think I think through the PDUFA process, we have an opportunity to get into that conversation, and we welcome that. I think breakthrough designation and accelerated approvals have been great, but of course, they are increasing the opportunity for innovative medicines to make it to unmet need, which is why they're breakthrough designation in the first place. I think the area that could do better, and I think there were some of the components brought through in the 21st Century Cures Bill, which was around biomarkers, it was around the modernization use of real-world data, it was around existing comparator arm data, so not having to put patients through the previous considered standard of care. I think there is a real opportunity to use biomarkers, genetic sequencing, to use some modernization techniques in terms of demonstrating value in the approval process to actually perhaps bring us forward to the next great opportunity of improving how we work with the FDA. I hope that'll be taken care of in PDUFA 7, I think it is.
7, yeah.
And that would be great. But if not, I think well done on bringing medicines through, but could we do it faster and could we identify subgroups faster? It's an interesting open point.
Gary, any thoughts?
No, I mean, I agree with what Paul said. I mean, I think the FDA recently has done a pretty good job of trying to get breakthrough therapies to the market quicker. I think anything else that can be done there, going back to Troy's first example of getting more therapies on the market that are competitive and creating that competition in the marketplace, to help provide greater access and hopefully and help improve affordability would be great.
I just say there is a real debate amongst people, at least in policy, about whether or not those changes would be beneficial. And I would say Jerry Avorn and Aaron Kesselheim at the Brigham had a very nice editorial in the New England Journal about 4 months ago on exactly that subject. And so I think reasonable people can disagree.
Tell us what they said there.
Well, basically not quite clear that that would overall sort of improve cancer care, that there may be some drugs that got through the process at a lower threshold like that would not be as efficacious as we might hope for. And I think reasonably sort of marshaled the evidence around that. So I think it's a tough call for the FDA. I think on the biosimilars, it looks to me like the FDA has begun to move there, and I think that the biosimilar pathway is going to be plenty good for us to get some excellent biosimilars on the market, and that's going to be the play in the 20s is really the emergence of the biosimilars, and that will help with affordability.
Any other thoughts on really pricing per se? Because I'm going to shift it just a little bit now. No? We're going to leave it alone? Okay. So let me go now to a little bit about how your organizations are collectively and individually impacting the world of cancer care. I'm going to start with Betsy, and the Brigham and Women's has really established a new translational research and clinical facility, and there's a $1 billion campaign to actually advance this innovation in not only technologies, but patient care and community health. Can you just give us a little bit more perspective on that and what the goals are overall?
Yeah. So we're fortunate to open this fall a new translational research building. It's modeled after the clinical center at the NIH, that being a bedside to bench to bedside model where clinical observations are made. Those are translated then into basic science research, translational research that are brought back to patients. And so this is a building in which we will have clinical care being delivered on an ambulatory basis, as well as research in the same building. This will be focused on the neurosciences and our orthopedics, arthritis, immunology, and allergy areas. But by analogy, we have the same process in the cancer arena as well.
That's fabulous. And Peter, as another provider, you recently joined the board of American Well, which, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is a major telemedicine provider. And I'm just curious, how have you thought about that in terms of the world of cancer care?
I personally think that telemedicine has vast opportunities to make care better and more affordable in this country. And as I think about cancer, I think one area where it could be helpful has to do with access to the latest thinking in cancer. I mean, we've talked a lot about targeted therapies, immunotherapy, et cetera. In reality, the expertise to do that well is available at a handful of places scattered around this country. It's inaccessible to most people in this country and to almost everyone around the world. And it seems to me like telemedicine through second opinion consultations could help enormously make that the advances in that technology much more readily available. And then in terms of providing follow-up to cancer patients, I mean, there are a lot of routine visits between surgical oncologists, medical oncologists and their patients years after they've had cancer. And it seems to me a lot of those could probably be done via telemedicine in a way that would be much more convenient for patients and less expensive to the healthcare system as well.
And do you think about that from a cost of delivery, how it gets integrated into a provider system, for example, as part of the continuum of care?
I think
what
it has
are
to
some of the thoughts there?
I think it has to be integrated into a provider system for it to work optimally, and has to be part of the workflow of the clinicians who are both seeing patients face to face, but also seeing them over the internet as well. And also to make sure that there's appropriate security for the transmission of that information as well.
Got it. So Paul, we really haven't talked about international other than to talk a little bit about the UK and what we might not want to be overall. But can you give us a sense, I mean, from an AstraZeneca standpoint and a global company, just give us a sense of cancer care worldwide, and what should the US potentially be thinking about to adopt?
I find that the examples given outside the US tend to be to reconfirm a negative inside the US. And so I would open up our minds to the fact that there's some exceptional care going on across the world. It's done very much more in partnership in some countries than others. France, for example. The UK.
And what do you mean by that, in partnership?
Well, sort of understanding the type of patient populations that would benefit from a medicine up front, and then entering into a discussion with the manufacturer or the research and developer about what that looks like and how do we get there. And so to make sure that the patients that need the treatments get the treatments. And it's more of a conversation together, and I think there's great examples of that. You know, I've worked in different healthcare systems myself, led AstraZeneca in Spain through the beginning of the austerity measures. And that was very different again in terms of, became very much a price conversation and less about medical care regressively. And in Japan, where I led AstraZeneca, there was a very socialized system, and it was, preserved the right for innovative medicines at all costs. And I think, and I say this to lots of people inside AstraZeneca in general, all the components in the US healthcare system are set up to make and continue for the healthcare system to be a world-class deliverer of health, full stop. but there are some contradictions. You know, you have a moonshot on one hand, and you have the failure of 21st century cures on the other. You have a price conversation, you have a value conversation, you have CMS saying you can't, and everybody's saying we need you to. And I think there needs to be the coming together with the focus around the patient, because after all, it's the patient we're all really interested in. I think if we get there and we take the learnings from that, we have a real shot at doing something meaningful here. I don't think you need to go outside the US to find what's special to continue, but I do think people need to get together, and the moonshot's a classic, the CMS Part B was a classic example of very little consultation, if none, on the preset. So that's what you get in that scenario.
So we're going to go, sorry, Gary, we're going to go into, I have one question very quickly, and then we're going to go into a lightning round because we're running out of time. Here's a question, and it says, since we've heard earlier that diagnostic reimbursement lags behind therapy and better cancer care requires much more integrated testing, shouldn't pharma fund diagnostics where they are the beneficiary of the test result?
So I'm happy to
Works
answer.
for me.
I feel like I'm getting,
Go ahead, Peter, go for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have an interesting situation, as I said. BRCA mutation testing is around 60%. Testing for T790M mutation in non-small cell lung cancer and EGFR mutation positive patients is, 30 or 40%. The question is, where do we step in and help each other? Because frankly, the concern is access to testing. And I'd much rather partner, we talk about risk share, and help patients get tested than stand and fall by the value of the medicine you do. It's most important that, and you said this up front, Betsy, the right patient gets the right medicine.
Yeah.
What you find is that's a very good use of the healthcare dollar. That is a perfect use. But when the testing levels aren't where they need to be, what can we do? And we're open for a conversation about making that much more efficient. We don't set the price either for tests.
Yeah.
We don't own a testing company, but we would love to work with people to make sure those that need
Again, shared risk in terms of the
Absolutely.
ultimate outcome. So beautifully answered. All right, we're going to go to a lightning round now, and here's a couple of questions. What are you most excited about when you think about the next frontier in cancer treatment, Peter?
If I was going into medical training again with Troy, there's no doubt at this day and age I'd be a medical oncologist. I mean, I just think this is the area where modern biology and the practice of medicine are intersecting in an incredibly exciting way. And so what excites me the most is just how quickly cancer care is getting better and what the potential is for the future. It's mind-boggling.
It is. Gary?
I think the advent of targeted therapies, getting back to the right treatment for the right patient at the right time, is very exciting.
Okay, precision medicine. Betsy?
What excites me is that many of our patients now, when they learn they have cancer, it's not a death sentence, but it's a conversation where we can take care of this, and you may have a chronic illness, but you can master this.
Paul?
For me, we've just signed a collaboration with Human Longevity,
Yeah.
2 million genome sequencing opportunity. I think we have a chance at really looking in a population health level about the appropriate targeted therapies for the long term. And if I get 5 more seconds, I would say CancerLink from ASCO, Flatiron as other opportunities, the management of oncology data and what happens next in the real world setting is going to be the next big breakthrough.
Absolutely. Technology and data. Troy?
Well, when you're talking about, taking care of really sick patients who are very fragile, and then you're talking about sort of brilliant people doing, impressive research that can really improve people's lives. It's a little venal to be the person who talks about the cost of things all the time, but nonetheless, at least the way I look at cancer right now is that although it feels like there are pressures, I think that most of the sort of pressures in the healthcare system around costs have really not cracked through on cancer yet. And I think it's going to require substantial changes in the way in which cancer therapy is offered in order to be able to sort of afford things as we go further. Because as we go into the 20s, what we're going to see is basically an aging population, and we won't see the same productivity gains we've had in the past. And so as a result, we're going to have to figure out how to do more with less. I don't really think we've seen that in cancer yet, but it will come.
And how soon do we think that, in fact, cancer will become a truly chronic disease or a curable disease? 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? Quickly.
For a number of cancers, we're already there. I hope in 10 years, there are a lot more that are there.
Gary?
Absolutely agree.
Majority 10 years, agree.
Oh, wow.
Some patient populations, it's now.
Longer still.
Oh my. Oh, man, venal. All right, last question to Betsy. So, the Broncos, are they going to repeat, or what should we expect?
If only we had a crystal ball, but very few teams have ever repeated 2 years in a row.
Oh, she's hoping. All right, thank you very much. A round of applause to the panelists.
It was a good political
Thank you.